Welcome to more World of Warplanes content from the Noble Queue. In this video I'm going to discuss the January 2024 patch that has made significant changes to the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. Hello there, and here on the tarmac outside my hangar is the familiar Northrop P-61 Black Widow, which was the reward aircraft for the 2022 edition of Holiday Manoeuvres and therefore has been in the game just over a year. And in that year it has had a profound impact on the game's balance. One good thing it did was drive the overpowered B-29C Super Fortress bomber from the skies. Unfortunately, it drove just about everything else from the skies as well. To put not too fine a point on it, this plane was grossly overpowered. I say was because the patch that has just brought the 2023 edition of Holiday Manoeuvres to an end has also brought rebalancing for this aircraft in particular. And what we'll do now is take a look at the numbers and see what we can make of them. Here's a small spreadsheet showing the changes to the P-61, and it's been updated slightly since it appeared in the preceding notes from the control tower video. Specifically, I've been able to add in the missing controllability figures. More on that in a moment. Let's go through the changes line by line. The first one, I'm going to short circuit it here, says that the turn time has been nerfed. We can see that in numbers. We'll move on for the moment and come back to that. More subtly, more time will be needed to reach the maximum roll and pitch rates. So you can see here that the roll rate is given as 90 degrees per second, but you don't go from 0 to 90 degrees instantaneously. It takes time, and the time that it takes has been lengthened. But these are hidden statistics. We don't know what it was before, and we don't know what it is now. All that we do know is that when you roll the aircraft, it's going to take a while before it responds to your instruction, and it's going to take longer than it used to. The same is also true of the pitch, which is the up and down motion, and additionally, the maximum pitch rate, whatever it was, being another hidden statistic we don't know, has been reduced. So that's a double whammy on pitch, and not only is it going to take longer to get to its maximum, that maximum has been reduced. In short, this aircraft's maneuverability in the roll and pitch axes is going to be considerably worse than it was before. The armament has also been nerfed, but we can see that in numbers. So let's go and look at the numbers right now. So as a reminder, we have 4 20mm cannons, and the first nerf is to the auto aim angle. 3 is pretty average for cannons, it's nice, and that's the amount you can be off target by, and the game will correct your aim and you'll still hit your target. It's now become a slightly worse 2.5 degrees, and this is getting into the territory where it becomes slightly tricky. Anything less, and I would start saying it was a bad auto aim angle, and you're going to have to aim very carefully. Now, this is particularly relevant to those of you who like to get into turn fights with your P-61s, because the auto aim angle is a big help if it's large when you're weaving and ducking and diving in a dogfight. So any reduction here is going to make it harder for you to hit your enemy aircraft. There's no change to the dispersion angle. That's the way that the bullets spread out, or shells spread out from your machine gun or your cannon, and 0.4 is very good, so the accuracy there has not been nerfed and remains excellent. However, you have also lost 33% of your overheat time, or your burst length, depending on what you like to call it. And that could be significant, particularly when going up against high hit point pool aircraft, such as the B-29C, which I've mentioned before. And this is where I see potentially an opening for the B-29C in its current form to make an unwelcome return to the game, because the P-61 is not going to be able to knock it down as easily as it used to, because its weapons now will overheat 33% more quickly, and that's not good news. So if we come to maneuverability, we can see that the rating has come down from 53 to 45, and we'll see how that stacks up against the other heavies at tier 8 shortly. But for now, we can see that the turn time has indeed gone up by almost 10%, certainly over 9%, from 12 seconds, which was very good, to 13.1 seconds, which is still pretty good, but now in the territory where other heavies are competitive with it, which wasn't the case previously. We can see that the roll rate is unchanged, but remember, you're going to take longer to get to that 90 degrees per second. And overall, the changes to the pitch, the changes to the ability to get to your maximum roll rate, the changes to the turn time, have given this aircraft a rating of 79.9 controllability, which is a very nearly a 6.5% decrease. This aircraft is going to be less nimble, it's going to slip more, particularly in the roll and pitch axes of movement, and that's going to make it trickier to control. So what we should do now is go and have a look at the figures in comparison to the other heavies. Here we have the spreadsheet showing all of the tier 8 heavies, and if you don't know how the spreadsheet works, there's a link in the description below to a video that explains what's going on here. Do have a look at that and then come back. So the P-61 is in columns C and D, and the rest of the heavies occupy 2 columns each, going off towards the right. And we've got all of them on the page, although I'm obscuring some of the figures for the BVP-203. That's not important, that's a completely different aircraft. And in terms of comparison, we don't need to get too much into detail. So the gun armament, well, we've already mentioned what's gone on here. The auto-aim angle has become worse, which means you've got to aim a little bit more accurately. And if you're throwing the aircraft about in a dogfight, then that becomes a bit of a nuisance when you have to aim more carefully. But more particularly, you're losing a lot of overheat time, 33%, as I've just mentioned, which means that what wasn't a particularly high DPS aircraft, the compensation for that being its long burst length has become less of an asset. And if you're going up against high hit point pool aircraft, you may very well find now that you're overheating your weapons if you're not careful, whereas before you could just fire at those with gay abandon and knock them down before you had to worry about your guns getting too hot. Ordnance, the P-61 never carried any, there's no changes there, so we'll skip over that. There are of course heavies such as the twin Mustangs that are excellent with their ordnance. Survivability, also no changes here. It's still built like a tank, and indeed you may now consider that given the changes to the P-61, you might want to concentrate on putting in reinforcement equipment so that you can specifically go after bombers. And that may become a thing if we find that the B-29C returns to the game and you are having to take those down and concentrate on those. But as it is, by far and away, it's the most tanky of the heavies on display here and remains so. Airspeed, never a quick aircraft, that wasn't its forte. However, that unbelievably long boost duration of 60 seconds is still there as well, so you are going to be able to keep going at a slightly slower speed than some of the heavies on display here for a lot longer, which means that you may be able to overhaul them if you're going to pursue them. Maneuverability is where it becomes fairly key. Previously, one of the big things about the P-61 was that there was no other heavy, unless it was brilliantly flown and very well built by an excellent pilot, that could stay in the air with it in a dogfight. So you just threw the P-61 into a dogfight with another heavy, and 9 times out of 10, if you knew what you were doing, you'd come out having killed it, and you could carry on and do other things. And that's why you would see these sitting over airfields dogfighting with the best of them. There are plenty of multi-rolls that weren't able to cope with the maneuverability of the P-61, and even quite a few of the fighters. It was a real pest. Well, these changes look as if they've completely reset the aircraft in terms of its maneuverability. The rating, as I say, has come down to 45, and I want to draw your attention immediately to the fact that it's now pretty much only on par with the P-82B twin Mustang. And the F-82E twin Mustang looks like it may now become a P-61 killer because it has got better maneuverability. And it doesn't stop there. The other aircraft, such as the Pancake and maybe the Chain Lightning, if they're really well flown, are going to be competitive with badly flown P-61s. Previously, you probably would say that even a well-flown Pancake or an XP-58 Chain Lightning was still going to struggle against a P-61 because the maneuverability was just so good. Now it's changed, and the other thing to bear in mind is that all of the Tier 7 fighters that have been brought into the game over 2023 are now clearly and unequivocally more maneuverable than a P-61, and that includes the Moonbat, which previously would have struggled to stay with a P-61. Now it's going to be able to, if you build it for turning that is, outturn a P-61 with ease. And of course, the Moonbat outguns a P-61. Food for thought. This change to the maneuverability, I think, may signal the end of the P-61 as an overpowered aircraft, and in fact may now make it only a so-so heavy, pretty much like the other heavies at Tier 8. Well, that's a thought, isn't it? One of the things still going for the P-61 is a good altitude performance, and certainly with respect to the twin Mustangs, now I would be looking to use that against them, because previously I would just see them and think I can outmaneuver you and I can shoot you down whether you like it or not. Now I'm going to have to use my altitude advantage against particularly the F-82 twin Mustang, because if I throw my aircraft into a dogfight with that and it's been built for maneuverability, I'm actually going to lose. And that's probably true of the P-82B twin Mustang. So just on paper, this looks like a huge change to the standing of the P-61. And here's the other problem regarding the B-29C. The P-61 pretty much drove the B-29C from the skies, because not only did it have the survivability necessary to stay with that aircraft, even if you attacked it from a bad angle, such as from behind or from the side, you should be trying to attack them from above or below. But of course, on the EU server, where you could see multiple B-29Cs, you wouldn't have time to do that without still losing the game, because at least one other B-29C, if not more, would be left alone whilst you were trying to get into position to shoot one of them down. Not only have you lost that ability, because you've got worse gun performance, and now you're going to overheat your guns potentially before you can shoot that B-29C down, and it will possibly shoot you down unless you're careful and take the time to get into the correct position. You've also got competitive heavies that can harass you whilst you're trying to shoot down the B-29C. And previously you could just break off, shoot down that heavy, and then probably go back to getting the B-29C out of the game. So here's the second worry point I have, that the B-29C is now going to be relatively unmolested by P-61s, not only because the guns are weaker and overheat, but because the plane is now being harassed by heavies that are now competitive with it that weren't before. And that's to say nothing of British multi-roles, for instance, and all of those tier 7 fighters that are coming to the game, and potentially the Moonbat's going to be a P-61 killer now as well. I think the days of the P-61 as a grossly overpowered aircraft, beloved of so many people who like to spam it, probably are coming to an end. Right, let's go on to the next section of the video. So here we are back with the P-61 on the tarmac, and here you can see my rather filthy maneuverability build for the P-61, because that was its forte. And now probably is not going to be its forte any longer, but we don't know what the new environment's going to be. The only thing we do know is that there are now planes that were not threats to the P-61, which most definitely are. I've already mentioned the F-82E twin Mustang, but I'm going to throw another thought in there. I mentioned the tier 7 fighters, but what about the P-80A, well built? That is going to be a deadly threat to a P-61, because now it will have the maneuverability to deal with this aircraft, whereas previously, depending on the respective builds of the two aircraft, it could have been touch and go as to which was the more maneuverable. As it happens, mine was more maneuverable, but many people's weren't. And what can you do? Well, first off, you've lost a lot of burst length, so the compensation for that would be to put on reinforced bolt carriers. I don't think there's a strong argument, at least for me as a pilot, for long gun barrels, and that's because I've got poor eyesight in one of my eyes, and often I can't see the aircraft at long range, and it doesn't matter if I could hit it at longer distance with long gun barrels, because I'm not going to hit it anyway, just can't see it. Some of you may feel differently about that, but I'd be very inclined to try reinforced bolt carriers to try and make those guns keep cool as long as possible. And if your thought is that you're going to use the P-61 as a bomber killer from now on, you want those guns to stay cooled as long as possible, and you'll put up with the lower DPS. One of the weaknesses of the P-61 was its vulnerable engines, and also the very long time it took for them to come back on their own. I think 60 seconds. Now, you can mount restart bottles, but with two engines you often found yourself having one engine shot out, possibly repairing it, and then having the other engine shot out, and thus still only having one engine and having to put up with that for 60 seconds. That already had me considering putting on engine armor protection. Now, the drawback of engine armor protection, of course, is that it makes what is a fairly slow aircraft a bit slower, but I think that's better than not having your engines, in which case your aircraft is definitely going to slow down. So if you're thinking about turning this into a bomber hunter, then engine armor protection is something that probably you should strongly consider. We'll come back to high energy builds in a moment. I'm at the moment thinking more about making this aircraft robust and chasing down bombers, and in which case you'd drop the lightweight wing frame, and you would go for the reinforced airframe to increase the HP of your aircraft. Reinforced skin, I think, is more for people who like dogfighting and want the advantage of still being able to maneuver pretty well with critical control surfaces damaged after they've used their pneumatic control assist. But if you're trying to build this like a tank, reinforced airframe is the way to go. If you're paranoid about pilot injury, and of course pilot injuries do occur a lot, then you can consider cockpit armor as well. Now, personally, I'm probably not going to try cockpit armor first. I want to keep the advantages of the accuracy that I've got with the gun sight, and I would look instead to reconfiguring the pilot skills. Now, this is Elise Clark, and I've been using her maneuverability to good effect on the P-61. It may be time to actually think about using a different pilot, particularly if you're moving away from maneuverability and towards a tank build. But one thing for sure, if you want to try and avoid your pilot being injured because you feel that you can't always get into a good position against bombers, below them in the case of the B-29C or above it, then try battle tested, which reduces the chance of injury to your pilot by 20%. Incidentally, if you put on cockpit armor and battle tested, that pretty much eliminates pilot injury, even from the most potent of rear gunners. You may want to think about that. Turning our attention elsewhere, the other build that comes to mind, and one that I haven't used in the past, is what I would call the high energy build, which is centered on speed. We're nearly there already. We'd probably keep these two pieces of equipment as they are. We drop the lightweight power unit. Now we've got a very long boost, so a combined injection boost system to make the aircraft fast under boost is an attractive option. If you're more concerned about cruise speed, the uprated engine could be fitted without too much worry because the fire resistance of the aircraft is 80, which is very high, and even though you get an adverse effect from fitting an uprated engine, it's not going to cause you to have to, for instance, drop the first aid kit or perhaps think about using fire resistance or firefighting skills on your pilot. So either of those two choices are possible. I'd probably incline initially to trying the combined injection boost system because, as I say, you've got that 60 seconds of boost. But if you're one of those who are very heavy on boost and find it hard not to keep your finger off the boost button, then you might want to try uprated engine first instead. Now, as I say, we don't know what the environment is going to be like over the coming weeks and months. All I know is that many aircraft are now threats that weren't before. So I'm not yet decided about how I'm going to change it. In fact, my first approach is going to be change nothing and see how the aircraft feels, try and identify where it now feels particularly vulnerable, particularly weak, and then compensate for that. And I don't know which route that's going to drive me down, whether it's going to be more towards high energy, more towards a tank type build, or maybe a combination of the two, or maybe I'm just going to guts it out and leave it as a maneuverable aircraft and just accept that now you're not going to be as dominant as you were before. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, I hope I've given you some ideas there, and let's move on. Well, so much for theory. The next step was to take the P-61 out and see how it performed with its new characteristics. And what you see here is a summary of these key points from 7 battles fought on a Twitch stream of 20th January 2024. So if you're within 60 days of that and you're keen to see what these battles were like, you can go and watch that if you so wish. So we've got some averages here, and we can see that the chevrons, the average was 3, maximum was 4, no heroes of the sky across these 7 battles, which I would regard as unusual, or at least it would have been unusual had the P-61 not been nerfed, and plenty of ones there, a couple here. Average personal points of 11,000, just over, a maximum of 18,000, just nearly 19,000. So that looks like a fairly old style P-61 game. But look here, minimum 5,100. In fact, if you look at these pair of battles here, numbers 2 and 3, you can see that the P-61 performed pretty badly. And I can tell you, it was my first experience of being bullied in a P-61 in these 2 battles, including one where I was over the traditional central repair base, where the P-61 would normally have thrived and racked up a lot of kills. I simply couldn't do it. So that was important and interesting, and probably I started adjusting my playing style in the later games, which is why I eventually worked up to what I think is still an outlier game, Battle Number 7, where I got 19,000 personal points, but also still a defeat, and I didn't shoot down enough bombers in that game. Moving on, rank still pretty high, still finished in the top 2 on average, and there are some first rank finishes there as well, as you can see. 11 kills, that definitely felt below average, although there was an ace in here, as you could see in that last battle. Damage, up and down, battles 2 and 3, very low, fairly decent in 7, but again, down from what I would have expected P-61 to do. Capture points, again, a bit of a variation here, a high of 700, a low of 200. Sector captures, very nearly 3. The last battle I managed 6, but as I say, I felt that battle was a bit of an outlier, and there was a 1 there, the very first battle as well. You do need to concentrate, in theory, on your class-specific mission of destroying ground attackers and bombers. Only averaged 2.4, maximum of 7, which funny enough came in the first battle, and I actually failed to destroy any in one of the battles where I got bullied. And then, as we can see, the numbers of time I lost the aircraft, 2. Okay, that doesn't sound necessarily high, but there's a maximum of 3 there, and that happened a couple of times. Did manage to avoid being destroyed at least once, and that felt on the high side as well. The P-61, at least when I was flying it, I often carried my flag all the way through battles, so that felt like an unusual experience as well. Overall, a win rate expressed in American football style, 57%, if you want to look at it that way. So 4 victories out of 7, and that also felt a little bit low. Now, this is only a snapshot, it's only 7 games, but there's still, I think, useful information coming out of here. And the key point I took away was that there were situations in which the P-61 was being outclassed, and I can honestly say that previously, I never felt that the P-61 was outclassed by almost anything that it was fighting. It's not enough for me to make any decisions about changing the build, so we'll persist with this. We'll probably continue to collect more information, and we'll see whether there is anything that indicates that a change of build is necessary. But the key point here is that the P-61 felt like just another heavy, as opposed to being the dominant beast in the jungle. That brings me to the end of my detailed, yet still early and provisional assessment of the changes brought to the P-61 by the January 2024 patch. And behind me there's a collage of aircraft that now, if properly built, will be deadly threats to the P-61, such as the P-80A, both of the twin Mustangs, albeit in slightly different ways. The P-82B, which is pictured here, has the ability to flip sectors with the ordnance and still be competitive in the sky in a one-on-one battle with the P-61. The F-82E variant will flat out outperform the P-61 if built for manoeuvrability in a one-on-one combat. You can rejig if you've put a high energy build on your Moonbat, that to a manoeuvrability build, and that will give a P-61 terrible time. And even a tier 7 fighter like the Kurfürst that's shown here, if also built for manoeuvrability, will do the same thing. But here's the thing, such is the profundity of the changes, I think pretty quickly people are going to stop thinking about the P-61 as a major factor in their build decisions, because it's basically become just another heavy. It's serviceable, it can still perform well in certain circumstances, but the days of it being an overpowered beast, as it has been throughout 2023, I believe, are coming to a close. Well, I hope you found that interesting, and that if you did, you'll come and see my future content. But until then, this is the Noble Q signing out.